Big political news is unfolding in Alaska, where President Donald Trump is preparing for a highly anticipated and controversial summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This meeting, set against the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine, is sparking heated debate both in Washington and around the world. What makes this summit particularly notable is Trump's apparent shift in attitude toward Moscow. Until recently, he had largely echoed the Russian point of view on the Ukraine conflict. But in recent weeks, there's been a change in tone. Reports suggest Trump has become increasingly frustrated, even angry, at Putin's continued attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine, as well as other alleged war crimes. Some experts believe this frustration might push Trump toward pursuing what he calls a just deal for Ukraine. Others remain skeptical, warning that the president's style of deal-making may not align with what Ukraine or its European allies would accept. Now let's talk about the man across the table, Vladimir Putin. He is currently under indictment by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. Specifically, the charges accuse him of overseeing the forced removal of thousands of Ukrainian children into Russia, many allegedly sent to childless families in violation of international law. While the United States is not a signatory to the ICC, meaning President Trump has no legal obligation to arrest Putin, the indictment still looms over Putin's international travel. Any trip outside of Russia carries the risk of arrest if he enters a country that honors ICC warrants. So why Alaska? Analysts believe the location is no coincidence. Alaska is geographically close to Russia, meaning Putin's aircraft won't have to travel far from Russian airspace. That minimizes security risks and limits the possibility of interception. And because Alaska is U.S. territory, the non-ICC membership ensures Trump won't face legal pressure to detain him. One of the sharpest critics of this summit is Colonel Hamish de Breton-Gordon, a former British Army officer and defense analyst. He has been clear in his view: Putin should be arrested for his crimes. But he also acknowledges that global politics often demands uncomfortable compromises. In his words, this is realpolitik, the pragmatic, sometimes morally ambiguous balancing of power and strategy. Still, the structure of this summit is raising eyebrows. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is not invited. Neither are European leaders, many of whom have played major roles in supporting Ukraine militarily and financially. Critics say it's deeply strange to negotiate a peace deal without including the country under attack. As Colonel de Breton-Gordon put it, these are the people who have been wronged, and they're not at the table. Even the lead-up to this summit has been chaotic. Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, traveled to Moscow to prepare the groundwork for the meeting. But according to reports, he returned with a dangerously inaccurate impression that Russia was ready to make meaningful concessions. In reality, Moscow has doubled down on its demands. Putin wants recognition of the 4 Ukrainian regions Russia has partially occupied, plus Crimea, as official Russian territory. Ukraine, for its part, continues to reject this outright. Some observers believe a ceasefire could only be achieved through land swaps, essentially Ukraine giving up some territory in exchange for peace. While Zelensky has publicly rejected such concessions, there are quiet suggestions he might eventually consider giving up some of the land lost since 2014. Still, this would fall far short of what Putin is demanding. History looms large over these talks. Back in the 1990s, under the Budapest Memorandum, Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees from the US, the UK, and Russia. Guarantees that Russia has now blatantly violated. This betrayal makes any negotiations today far more complicated. If Trump cannot secure a deal that satisfies Ukraine and Europe, there's a real possibility that the U.S. could step back from its current level of involvement. In fact, some voices within the administration and Congress have suggested that U.S. taxpayers no longer want to finance Ukraine's war effort. If that happens, European nations would be forced to shoulder the main responsibility for Ukraine's defense. Militarily, Europe does have significant capabilities. NATO's European members are equipped to provide substantial military support. However, they still rely heavily on U.S. intelligence and surveillance, which have been crucial for Ukraine's battlefield awareness. Losing that advantage could weaken Europe's ability to counter Russia effectively. In this context, the Alaska summit may not be about immediately ending the war. It could be about starting a process. Even skeptics admit that sometimes high-profile meetings can open doors to progress, even if the first encounter produces no concrete results. But without Ukrainian or European participation, there's a lingering question. Whose version of peace will actually be on the table? Trump's critics worry that a deal driven solely by Washington and Moscow could prioritize speed over justice, locking in territorial losses for Ukraine and emboldening Russia to try similar tactics in the future. On the other hand, supporters of the president argue that Trump's willingness to speak directly with Putin could break through diplomatic deadlocks that have persisted under previous administrations. Whatever the outcome, one thing is clear: this summit will be watched closely by world leaders, military analysts, and the public alike. It could mark the beginning of a new phase in the war, or it could deepen the divisions between Ukraine's allies over how to end it. For now, all eyes are on Alaska. And by Friday, we may know whether this meeting is a step toward peace or another chapter in a conflict with no clear end in sight. So what's your take? Drop a comment below.